Okay, welcome everyone to the Urban Herald. We've got a really intriguing historical puzzle for you today, one that kind of jumps right off the map, you could say.
It really does.
Imagine this. For centuries, before anyone officially sailed across the Atlantic and, discovered South America, European maps were already showing this mysterious island way out in the ocean.
hmm
And its name sounds incredibly familiar, very close to one of the biggest countries on that continent we now know.
We're talking about Hy-Brasil, a mythical Irish island.
Appearing on charts hundreds of years before the country Brazil in South America even got its name. How does that happen?
Well, that's the core of it, isn't it? It forces you to look beyond the standard discovery story.
Right.
It pulls together mythology, actual map making, navigation tools, and just sheer belief really makes you ask, what gets put on a map and why.
Exactly. And here at the Urban Herald, we've been digging into the sources to try and untangle this.
Yeah, there's some fascinating material.
So our mission today is to explore the legend of this phantom island, Hy-Brasil, figure out how and why it kept showing up on maps for so long,
Then look at the South American country, Brazil, how it got its name.
and then tackle the big question: is there any real connection between these two Brazils, or is it just a massive coincidence?
Get ready for some strange stuff. Magical mist, weird inhabitants, stubborn map makers.
And a debate that's actually still ongoing in some ways.
Yeah.
It really shows how blurry the lines were between the known world and, well, the imagined one for early map makers.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's start with the legend itself, Hy-Brasil. Where does this idea even come from?
It seems to have really deep roots in Celtic mythology. It's tied into the concept of the other world.
The other world, like parallel dimensions, sorta?
Kind of, yeah. Hidden realms, often invisible to humans. Hy-Brasil was supposedly shrouded in this thick mist all the time.
Always hidden?
Almost always. The legend says it only became visible to mortals once every 7 years.
Wow, once every 7 years. That definitely adds to the mystery, doesn't it? Makes it sound almost impossible to find.
Exactly. Very elusive.
What about the name Hy-Brasil? Does it mean anything specific in Irish Gaelic?
Well, scholars have debated that a bit. There are a couple of main ideas from old Irish sources.
Okay.
One is Hy-Brasil. That means something like the descendants of Briaol, maybe a link to some ancient clan or mythical figure.
Descendants of Brazil. Okay. What's the other one?
The other possibility comes from Ibre, meaning island, and Bre could mean, well, beauty or maybe worth.
So Island of Beauty or Island of Worth?
Potentially, yeah, or Island of Brisel's descendants. It's not totally clear-cut.
Island of Beauty definitely sounds like it fits with the mythical paradise idea. What was it supposed to be like, according to the stories?
Oh, it was painted as a classic paradise, very similar to other Celtic otherworlds like Tir na Nog,
Right, the land of eternal youth.
Exactly that kind of thing. Descriptions often mention people living there forever young, perfect health, no sadness, no death. Basically eternal bliss.
A true utopia, then.
Right.
Were there, more specific details? What would you find if you got there?
Yeah, some accounts added some really vivid touches. Talk of an advanced civilization, maybe lots of gold and silver, treasures.
Ah, riches.
And then there's this account from Captain John Nisbet, 17th century, I think. Probably mostly fantasy, but
You want?
he described meeting a lone wise man, a sage, living in this stone castle. And weirdly, the place was overrun with large black rabbits.
Large black rabbit. That's specific and memorable.
It is, isn't it? Maybe symbolic, the sage for wisdom, the rabbits for, I don't know, that border between worlds. It shows how vivid the imagery became.
Definitely sticks in your mind.
Yeah.
Were there any consistent physical descriptions of the island itself across the legends?
Yes, and this is where it starts to connect to the maps, which is really interesting.
Yes.
Across many stories, and later on the maps too, the island is often shown as being perfectly circular.
Perfectly round.
Yeah. And often with a river or a channel running straight through the middle, usually east to west, cutting the circle in half.
Huh. That's a very distinct image.
Yeah.
Did that show up often?
Quite consistently, yeah. That circular shape in the dividing river. And also the idea of friendly inhabitants, maybe greeting visitors with gold and silver.
Okay, so it wasn't just a vague idea. It had these specific repeating features. But now the really surprising part, this wasn't just folklore, like Gerald Griffin's poem about it much later. It actually started appearing on real maps. Maps for sailors.
And that's where the cartographic puzzle really kicks in. The earliest documented time we see an island called Insula de Brazil, west of Ireland, is on a map from 1325.
1325, wow.
Angelino Dulcert's Portolan chart. He was a big map maker, Majorcan, maybe Genoese links. This is way before the main age of discovery.
1325. That's almost 2 centuries before Columbus even sailed.
Yeah.
And 175 years before Cabral landed in what we now call Brazil. Was it just a one-off on that map?
No, not at all. Dalsert's map seems to have started something. You see Insula de Brazil pop up again in Andrea Bianco's atlas in 1436. He was Venetian.
So the idea was spreading among mapmakers, sailors.
It seems so. And then there's the 1375 Catalan Atlas. That's considered a masterpiece, right?
Yeah, huge, incredibly detailed for the time. Did it show Hy-Brasil?
It did. It shows Ilha de Brazil, slightly different spelling, placed pretty clearly out there in the Atlantic. Shows it was considered significant enough to include on this state-of-the-art map, even if its basis was myth.
And did those maps show the circle shape, the river?
Amazingly, yes. Even much, much later. There's a map by João Teixeira Albernaz, a Portuguese mapmaker from 1630.
Nearly 300 years after Dulcert.
Right. And he still draws do Brazil as a round island with that channel through the middle. The consistency is just bizarre, given no one had actually found it.
And it stayed on maps for how long altogether?
An astonishingly long time. From that first map in 1325 all the way until 1873.
1873, that's 548 years.
Yep. It survived on charts while the entire rest of the world was being mapped. This phantom island just kept hanging on.
Did anyone actually, try to sail there, look for it?
Oh, absolutely. There were real expeditions. We know about voyages leaving Bristol in England in 1480 and 1481. Their specific goal was to find the Isle of Brazil.
So people really believed it was out there.
Yeah,
Enough to fund ships.
definitely. It shows the name and the idea were powerful. There's even some speculation, though you can't prove it, that these Bristol voyages searching for Brazil or maybe other Western lands might have influenced John Cabot's big voyage in 1497.
Huh. So the name was definitely circulating in those pre-Columbus seafaring communities.
Yeah.
Since it was mythical, did map makers put it in the same spot all the time?
No, not at all. That's another funny thing. Often it's west of Ireland, sure, but sometimes you'll see it shifted near Brittany or down by the Azores or even further west, closer to where Newfoundland is.
So it kind of wandered around on the maps.
It really did, which maybe suggests it was more of a symbol for something out west rather than a specific known location. And the name wasn't consistent either. Over 13 different spellings have been found across the centuries.
13 spellings. It's amazing it lasted so long. When did map makers finally start saying, okay, maybe this isn't real?
It took a surprisingly long time. Thomas Jeffreys, a British map maker, in 1753, he included it, but he added a note saying, Imaginary Isle of O Brazil.
Finally acknowledging it.
But still putting it on the map.
Exactly. Sort of out of habit or tradition, maybe. The very last time it appeared seems to be on British Admiralty charts in 1873. And even then, it was listed almost like a hazard note. Brazil Rock.
Just Brazil Rock. Wow. Okay, so we have this mythical, circular, misty island named Brazil, west of Ireland, on maps from 1325 to 1873. Now, let's switch to the other side of this puzzle. South America, the country we call Brazil. When did Europeans first officially reach that land?
That was Pedro Álvares Cabral, the Portuguese explorer in the year 1500. 1500. And our mythical island, Brazil, first shows up on a map in 1325.
That's
175 years before the country was encountered.
Exactly. That time gap is the absolute core of this whole mystery. And when Cabral got there in 1500, he didn't call it Brazil.
You didn't? What did he call it?
Initially, Ilha de Veracruz, Island of the True Cross. Because at first, he thought it was just the big island.
Okay.
Then, maybe around 1510, they realized it was part of a huge continent, so it got renamed Terra de Santa Cruz, Land of the Holy Cross.
Still not Brazil. When did that name take over?
The name Terra de Brazil, Land of Brazil, really started becoming common by the 1550s. And this time, the name was directly tied to a natural resource they found there in huge quantities.
Ah, the Brazilwood tree. Pau Brazil.
That's the one. Pau is Portuguese for wood, and Brazil comes from brasa.
Brasa, meaning ember, like glowing coal.
Exactly. The wood from this tree, the heartwood, produced this incredibly vibrant red dye. The color reminded people of burning embers. And that dye was hugely valuable in Europe for textiles.
So the land became known as the place you get this valuable red ember wood from, Terra de Brazil.
Precisely, named after the economic resource.
Okay, so this is where it gets tricky. The South American country gets named for a tree with wood like embers, brasa. The mythical Irish island's name might come from Irish Gaelic roots, descendants of Brasail, or Island of Beauty. But wasn't there also some talk about the island's name maybe coming from a medieval word for red dyes too.
Yes, exactly. That adds another layer of complexity. Some researchers, like Paulo Ravelli back in the day, pointed out that terms like Brazil or Brazilium were actually used in medieval Europe, sometimes on maps or in trade documents, to refer to various types of wood that produced red dyes. Not necessarily the South American tree, which they didn't know about yet, but other sources of red dye from Asia, for instance.
So the island's name might also have a connection to red dye, completely separate from the South American tree.
It's a possibility that complicates the etymology. So you have South America named for its specific red dye wood, Brasa. The island named either from Irish myth or potentially from a generic medieval term for red dye wood, Brazilium, and the island's name appearing on maps 175 years earlier. That's the puzzle.
Which leads us right to the big question. Is the shared name just a massive, unbelievable coincidence? Or is there some kind of connection? What are the main ways scholars try to explain this, like the Urban Herald article outlined?
Right. There are basically three main viewpoints you come across in the academic discussion. The first one, and this is definitely the mainstream, most accepted view right now, is the coincidence theory.
Okay, and that says...
It argues they're totally separate, two different names popping up independently from completely different linguistic roots and historical situations.
So Irish myth, or maybe medieval dye terms for the island, versus Portuguese brasa for the country, just happen to sound the same.
Pretty much. This view sees the island's name coming first as just a historical accident, a really strange quirk, but not proof that one influenced the other. The linguistic evidence for separate origins is pretty strong.
Okay, pure coincidence. What's the second view?
The second one is often called the influence theory. It's more of a minority position, but it suggests there might be a subtle link. Not that the Portuguese deliberately named the country after the mythical island, but
what?
But that maybe the name Brazil itself was kind of floating around more generally in Atlantic maritime circles before 1500.
How so?
Well, think about those Bristol voyages looking for the Isle of Brazil. Bristol was a major port connected to Irish ports, Portuguese ports. The idea is that maybe sailors and traders heard the name Brazil associated with some mythical land far to the west.
So the name was just sort of in the air among sailors talking about the Western Atlantic.
Possibly, it's speculative, but it rests on how connected these European ports were. The theory isn't that they found the mythical island and then named the continent after it. It's more like the name Brazil became vaguely associated with somewhere west, maybe through these earlier voyages or shared lore. Then, when they found the actual landmass and the valuable Brazil wood tree, Brasa, the similar-sounding name might have just stuck, perhaps partly because the word itself was already subconsciously linked to the west, like a lexical echo, as some put it.
A lexical echo. That's a cool phrase. Subtle. Okay, and the third position?
The third one is the most speculative and definitely the most controversial. It's sometimes called the pre-Columbian knowledge theory.
It sounds intriguing. What does that suggest?
This idea hints that maybe these phantom islands on early maps, like Hy-Brasil, weren't purely myth. Perhaps they reflect some kind of garbled secondhand knowledge or rumors of lands across the Atlantic before the official voyages of Columbus or Cabral.
So the island on the map could be a distorted echo of actual, earlier, unrecorded contact with the Americas.
That's the general thought. Maybe fishermen blown off course or secret voyages. The idea is that Hy-Brasil's position, sometimes drifting westward on maps, might hint at this vague early awareness.
But that's highly debated, right? Not much hard proof.
Very little concrete evidence that's widely accepted by historians, no. It's mostly based on interpreting these ambiguous map features. Mainstream scholarship is very wary of this one, but it definitely captures the imagination.
So if we pull it all together, where does the general scholarly consensus land right now?
The strong consensus, based on the linguistic and historical evidence we have, really favors the coincidence theory. Two independent names, different origins, the timing is just a fascinating overlap. The influence theory remains a minority possibility, kind of intriguing but hard to pin down. And the pre-Columbian knowledge idea is largely seen as lacking solid proof.
It really shows how messy history and naming can be. Even if it is just coincidence, the fact that Hy-Brasil stuck around on maps for so long is just amazing. Are there any modern scientific ideas about why people might have kept thinking they saw it?
Yeah, science offers a couple of plausible explanations for the sightings that could have kept the legend alive, beyond just pure belief.
Like what?
One possibility involves geology. There's a large underwater feature called the Porcupine Bank, about 200 kilometers west of Ireland.
Okay.
It's deep now, but parts of it might actually have been exposed land. an island.
So maybe Hy-Brasil's like a folk memory, a memory of actual land that disappeared beneath the waves,
Yeah.
passed down through millennia.
It's a possibility, yeah. A kind of deep-time geographical memory preserved in myth. The other major explanation is optical illusions.
Mirages.
Exactly. Specifically, something called a superior mirage. These happen sometimes over cold water when you get a layer of warmer air sitting on top of colder air near the surface.
Right, a temperature inversion.
Yeah, and that setup can bend light rays from objects far over the horizon, like distant coastlines, or maybe even just cloud formations, making them appear lifted up, distorted, looking like islands floating in the sky or on the water where there's nothing.
And someone seeing that could easily think, aha, Hy-Brasil.
Absolutely. There's a well-documented case near Ballycotton in Ireland back in 1878. Multiple reliable witnesses swore they saw a distinct island, trees and all, out on the horizon where charts showed only open sea. These mirages, even if rare, could provide really compelling, though false, visual proof that kept the belief going.
So maybe a combination of ancient memory and occasional atmospheric tricks. Beyond the maps and the science, did this Hy-Brasil legend leave a lasting mark on culture?
Oh, definitely. Especially in Ireland. The whole tradition of mythical islands to the west, with Hy-Brasil being a prime example, it really seeped into Irish literature, art, music.
Like that Gerald Griffin poem we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. It cemented that romantic image of Hy-Brasil as this distant, perfect, maybe unattainable paradise.
Which probably resonates with themes of emigration, right? The search for a better life across the sea.
Precisely. It becomes a powerful symbol for hope, for escape, for that longing for somewhere else. You still see artists and musicians drawing on it today, sometimes playing with the Irish myth versus the South American reality.
And it wasn't just Irish writers. Didn't someone like J.R.R. Tolkien comment on it?
He did, yeah. Tolkien was fascinated by mythology and language, and he noted the potential name overlap in his own scholarly work on medieval literature. And there have been full studies, like Barbara Freitag's work, tracing how this map feature transformed into this really integrated part of Irish folklore, especially in the 19th century.
And people are still interested today. You mentioned map exhibitions featuring it.
Yeah, places like the Norman B. Leventhal Map Center often highlight these phantom islands. It taps into this enduring fascination we have with old maps, with mysteries, with the stories they tell, both the real ones and the imagined ones.
You know, the idea of a place that doesn't exist, staying on maps for 500 years.
Yeah.
It feels weirdly relevant today too, doesn't it? With information, misinformation.
Yeah.
How ideas, even wrong ones, can spread and stick around.
It's a fantastic historical example of that, exactly. Hy-Brasil shows how potent myth and cultural belief can be, even influencing something as supposedly objective as a map. It shows how resilient stories can be, even against a lack of evidence. And it reminds you that folklore isn't just stories. It's like a cultural memory bank, holding on to ideas and perceptions that shape how we see the world.
So wrapping up our deep dive here at the Urban Herald, we're left with this amazing ghost on the map.
Absolutely. The story of Hy-Brasil is just this perfect storm of imagination, belief, culture, and the very real practical business of trying to chart the unknown world. Sticking around for over 500 years, that's the power of a good story.
And that undeniable fact, the island's name showing up 175 years before the country's name. It just hangs there, this incredible historical coincidence, most likely.
It does. It fuels those debates. Coincidence, influence, something else. Whatever the answer, the parallel lives of Hy-Brasil the myth and Brazil the nation make for an irresistible historical puzzle.
Yeah. And really, this whole story is way more than just a mapping mistake. It speaks volumes about exploration itself, doesn't it? How the drive to find out what's out there has always been powered as much by the stories we tell about the unknown, the myths we carry, as by hard data. Belief can literally draw the map.
That's a great way to put it. And even now in our age of satellites where we think we've mapped everything, maybe the story of Hy-Brasil reminds us that our curiosity, our fundamental urge to discover, might still be sparked by the mysteries we imagine are out there, just beyond the edge. What other hidden connections, what other stories might still be lurking just out of sight, waiting in the mist?